We could have been stardust, same world but without us. Something made us find each other out there. Made us realize we're more than just stardust. Ignore this fact if you must, to do what your dreams are telling you to do. And I'll be out there looking for someone like you.
Hi, I'm Frank Daly, and this is That Sounds Interesting podcast. Today I'm chatting with Maura Carta, who's a Californian painter, and she's painted some wonderful buildings, interiors, still lifes, portraits, and landscapes. So welcome, Maura. I'm delighted to have you on the podcast today.
Thank you so much, Frank. Thank you for asking me. It's a pleasure to be here.
Maura, let's just start by going back to the time when you were in Dresden. I think you said that you went to the Dresden Academy of Fine Arts.
That's right. It really was a dream come true. I had been working in corporate America for 10 years and really wanting to go to art school, but not seeing a way forward with that. It's very expensive over here. And I just couldn't see how I could afford to quit my job and pay for art school. So my husband, his job, they had an opportunity to go over to Dresden, Germany. And not only was I going to be able to quit my job and paint full time, but then there was an art academy there and they accepted me. So it was totally a dream come true. I loved it there.
That's super. And you speak German then?
Oh, I had to learn. So when I arrived, I had maybe 6 months beforehand to learn some remedial German. And it turns out we were in Germany for 15 years. So by the end, I could speak some German. But in the beginning, it was very difficult. And my professors, they didn't speak any English. They were all from the Eastern Bloc. They had been taught Russian as kids. And so I had to rely on my fellow students. They were all 19 and I was about 31, but they spoke English. And, I had a professor, Siegfried Klotz. He was so great. And he would just do charades with me until I finally understood what he said, or he would write it down on a little piece of paper. And of course, there was no internet back then. So I had this huge dictionary and I would go look up every word. So it was challenging in the beginning, but I got there.
Yes, you certainly did, because you're producing such lovely work, I have to say, Maura. I know you said also that you went to Berlin some of the time when you were there.
Yes, I love Berlin. So we got a little apartment in Berlin. We had this fantasy that we're going to retire in Berlin, and we got this little apartment. I just loved it there. So we would go up on the weekends. And when we started going up, I had just given birth to my daughter. So there wasn't a lot of time to paint. But I did manage to to get a couple of paintings out of our weekends there. And, Berlin is just teeming with young energy and art, and I love it up there.
Berlin has a character of its own, I have to say.
It does.
Just looking at the paintings that we'll get into looking at the portfolio in a second, but just generally describing the type of painting you did when you were in Dresden versus the paintings that you do now in California.
So, before getting to art school, I was self-taught, basically. I took a smattering of classes here and there. A lot of times it would be a life drawing class where there was no instruction. So all I knew how to do before arriving to art school was I would look at what I wanted to paint and I would say, okay, I'm going to try and match that color right there. And I'd mix it up on my palette and then I'd put it on my canvas and say, okay, that part's done. Now I'll go to the next section and the next color. And since then, through art school and workshops after it and reading books and YouTube videos, I've learned so much more about there's warm and cool in just about any surface. Think about the shapes in your composition, just not what appeals to you intuitively. Think about the brush strokes, the direction of the brush strokes, the thickness and thinness of your paints. The underpainting, maybe you have a ground that's a different color that's shining through, the soft and hard edges. So all of those things, reflected light, I think about now. I did not even know to think about them back then.
That's a huge benefit of going to a college to learn actually what to do in terms of art. I mean, many people are self-taught artists as well who do quite well, but there's a huge benefit in learning the accumulated knowledge of centuries that can get taught in a college.
Yes, and I would say to anybody, don't feel like you need to go to art school to get all this information. The things that I just described, not all of those I got from art school. As I said, from books, from practicing, from YouTube, from the internet. One of the things I also got from art school was demystifying the allure of it. So before art school, I thought, well, I'm not really a valid painter because I didn't go to art school. And now that I've been, I feel as though, well, I've got that stamp now. And anybody who hasn't gone to art school can't, for whatever reason, you are just as valid. You can learn anything that you need to learn to get where you want to get.
When it finished the course and you started painting in Dresden, you were painting a lot of architectural buildings. In fact, you seem to have a great penchant for architecture.
Well, I was living downtown Dresden and I didn't have a car. So that limited me to getting out to the landscape areas. Although I did live very close to the Elbe River, so I did get some river vistas, which was great. But mostly I would just go out with all my stuff. And back then I didn't know how to pare down all my stuff. So it was very heavy. I would load it onto my bike and I would just ride until I saw something or until it got to be maybe around 10 a.m. And then I thought, that's it. I'm stopping my bike. I'm just going to find a composition here and just sort of paint. And so a lot of it was architecture. Also, my undergraduate degree is in mathematics. I think I have a very logical mind, and I find painting buildings easier than painting a tree. A tree is organic. It has random branches, and I find that difficult. I'm still working on that. Whereas a building, I can make a straight line and I can make a 45-degree angle line. That's easy.
Also, the range of colors that you used in Dresden seemed to be cooler. Now, I think it's because the light is much cooler. It's cloudier in Germany. I've spent a good lot of time in Berlin, and certainly it is there. Now, I've been through Dresden as well. And so compared to California, and it's about 20 years since I've been in California, the light is significantly different. And that's a big influence, I guess, in the type of color and paint you use.
Yeah, I think I've also evolved as far as value is concerned. I think back then I had a more difficult time figuring out what's the darkest part of this painting, what's the lightest. Also, I was heavily using Payne's gray back then. That was sort of my go-to dark, and that's a very blue dark, and I don't use that anymore. I remember one time I had a show, and it's very good to see all your paintings up together, and you can really see what you tend towards. And I thought, well, I am just using way too much Payne's gray. So I took it out of my palette. I think that also makes a difference.
You're right. You can overuse any color and it can make a difference. In your California paintings, you use a lot more red. And maybe, I know you said you don't use as much Payne's gray, and that's obviously, that has it. And because of the blue, it has an opposite effect, I guess, for doing it. But you use quite a lot of red in your clouds and on the edges of buildings, and also in the shadows, the purple, reddy shadows that are in there as well. So
Sure. So definitely in the shadows, I'll use a lot of alizarin crimson, maybe mixed with ultramarine blue. That's one of my go-tos. I think the red in the clouds and everything is just, I'll use for my landscapes. I use these wood panels. I prime them 3 times with white gesso, and then I put a layer. This is raw sienna plus alizarin crimson, and I really like the way then the clouds will show through the alizarin crimson, and raw sienna shows through underneath the clouds. So here's one. We were going to talk about this. You can see how it's showing through. So what happens is then your eye will mix these colors optically. They're not mixed physically on the panel, but they're mixed optically, and I really like that. So Also, you can see here, it's shining through a little bit on the roof, and then I let it shine through down here a little bit so it looks like the reflected light. I use it to my advantage with landscapes.
Do you tend to do value studies before you start to do paintings, or do you just are so used to painting you just do them automatically? You automatically find where the color, where the light and dark shades are.
It depends what I'm painting. So when I do a value study, I call it a grisaille. It's just a painting in dark and light. Um, I like to let that dry before going over it with color, and that will usually take at least a day. So if I'm going out to do some plein air painting, I'm probably not going to do a grisaille unless it's a bigger landscape, in which case, maybe I'm going to return to that several days in a row. And I love doing a grisaille. So I have an example. Here's another painting of John, and I never got to put the color over it for whatever reason, and so the advantage of doing this is that the first day, all you need to think about is the composition and the light and the dark. You don't need to think about the color. And then the other benefit is then the next day when you come back and you put the color on top of it, when you put color on top of this white, it's like you're putting, you know, a film of like colored saran wrap or something on top of a white wall. So it gives it a different kind of glow than you're going to get with an alla prima. Again, the colors are being combined optically in your head and not physically on the panel.
And that's a kind of an impressionist type of approach as well. If you think impressionists did those little dots sometimes, or the short paint strokes as well, and your brain combined them. I mean, it's a different technique than we're talking about here, but it's also based on the same idea that your brain combines colors into to make the actual color that you're looking at, and you don't realize it sometimes.
That's right. And the old masters used this grisaille technique all the time, and they used it with egg tempera instead of oil paint, and they would just, even in the middle of a painting, they could add that white, and then it would dry immediately, and then they would add their oil painting on top for a different type of color.
What do you tend to use, like in terms of brushes and in paints? And I mean, you've shown me some boards that you use as well, and you paint quite small and but huge amount of detail in that small painting, I have to say.
Right. So for my alla prima work, I do tend to paint on a small level, just a small format, so that I can get it finished that day. I love the alla prima. I love going out and starting something new. The other advantage to painting small is I'm constantly trying to simplify. I feel as though I came to my art education fairly late in life, and I had already ingrained some perhaps bad habits. I didn't know about simplification. And so now when I paint small, I'm forced to simplify. My brushes don't go any smaller. So that's a good exercise for me. Brushes, I'm not terribly particular about them. As long as they're the right size. I use both filberts and flats. I get pretty cheap synthetic ones. I use a combination of alkyds and regular oils so that my painting will be dry the next day in case I want to glaze it or go back to the site and work on it again. So here's an example of, I like Winsor & Newton alkyds. They're great. And I don't want all my colors to be alkyds because then I'm just wasting paints. The next day it's all dry. I've got to throw it all out. My favorite oil paints, I think, are blocks. But there's a lot of great brands out there. And for anybody beginning, don't let the paints limit you in any way. Just get whatever is decent and cheap and work on values and composition and just get out there and paint. As far as a gel, I used to use linseed oil, but then I'd be out there and the wind would blow my linseed oil over and it would get all over everything. And so I use this now. It's a gel, and I really like it as a medium.
That's good. Obviously, from doing lots and lots of paintings, you refine what works well for you. Do you ever make drawing studies before you paint, or do you always paint directly?
I do. So here's my sketchbooks from the last year or two, and they're full of little thumbnail sketches. I don't always do a thumbnail sketch, but it's always a good idea to do one. Sometimes I'll get to a site and I'll think, oh, that's it. That's what I've got to paint. And I know that the light is going to start changing in about 45 minutes. I know it's going to be totally gone in 2 hours. So I just get going, and I tell myself, I'm just going to work out the composition on the board. And if it's not right, I'm going to wipe it off and start over and move things. But really, just taking that 5 minutes to do 4 little thumbnail sketches, just outlining the major shapes that you want and where you want them, and then trying it again, moving those shapes around just a little bit. Do that a couple times, look at that and say, well, which one do I like best? Just intuitively. It really helps the painting process. It's saving time, really.
When I look across all the work you've done, that I can see the portfolios that you have online, um, it's all about light and shadow and brushwork as well. But light and shadow, they're the main thing. That's what draws me to your paintings, I have to say. The shadows on the trees, for example, in one of the paintings where you have a very, we'll be talking about it in a little while, Baylands, I think it was called. And the shadow on top of the tree as well, and the light coming in on part of the bark, and then also the shadows on the ground. That's what it it it's exactly like you'd imagine it would be. So it's very well represented, I have to say. Um, just apart from making those studies occasionally, then you actually start working, I guess, right away, and you try and do a painting every day, or not painting in one day, or maybe in 2 days. Or would you ever spend a long amount of time working on a painting?
Sure. My portraits, I'll spend as many times as I can get that model to sit for me. So 3 to 4 times if I'm lucky. And then I'll do the same with a landscape. If I want to do a larger landscape, I'll start with a grisaille the first day, and then I'll go back 3 or 4 more times. Um, I really enjoy just the alla prima, and so that's what I've been doing more of lately. But even 2 days is not too much, and that can add a lot.
So you have a painting called Pigeon Point.
I think I have one version of it right here. I've done it a couple times, but this might be the smaller version of it. I love that spot. It's so beautiful there.
You had done an underpainting, and you could see the brushwork coming through, and then also merging with the brushwork on top. Is that a? Do you always do that, or do you just occasionally do that?
I like it when that happens. Right. I really like it when the underpainting comes through. Um, I want it to come through where I want it to, and I want to cover it up where I don't want it. And that's a decision that sometimes is hit or miss. Sometimes I may have covered it all up in one area, and then it's too late, and there's a certain deadness to that area now that I've covered all that up. I think you can see a little bit of it still showing through in the water here, and I feel like that's working. If I were to cover that all up, I could recreate it with other colors, but it would be sort of a different technique. And then I did cover it all up here because I felt as though that really needed solidity. I needed that to look like rocks on the cliff. And water is more, you can see through it, so it's okay for some of that to come through. Same with up here in the sky, it's okay for some of that to come through.
Of course, actually, and I think it's very effective in the water. I was immediately drawn to the texture of the underpainting and then the water itself, and I felt that it worked so well, I have to say. So, I mean, so you're working on multiple levels. If we go back to what you mentioned earlier on, you were using a particular toning of a canvas first of all, and then using some of that in the eventual painting, and then also using the brush strokes that came from that underpainting, and also using that in the final result as well. So it's very much a combination of what's happening in multiple layers.
That's right. You just play it by ear. You say, what is the next step I need to do in this painting? And you do it. And if it doesn't turn out right, well, there's always tomorrow.
That's a super attitude to have, and I think it's exactly the correct one. You can, well, in oil paint, you could just paint it out or scrub it out or whatever. In watercolors or in acrylic, well, you can do it in acrylic as well, but I tend to just use another board or another piece of paper if I'm doing it in watercolors. But just moving on, actually, about with Plein, the Plein clouds, I thought that was a very nice painting in terms of how you got the perspective in the clouds and the shadows in the clouds.
I love painting clouds, and I don't feel like I'm there yet. I still have further to go on clouds. The thing about them is they're there for less than 5 minutes. And so you've got to get the shapes immediately. So once I find shapes of clouds that I like, I just try and sort of sketch the outline, because then it's gone. And then I can look at the clouds that are up there for the colors. They're not the same clouds, but it's going to have the same light. They're going to have the same colors. So they really have, they're sort of purple at the bottom, but then, and cool, but then there's also warmth in them as well. And I like to have maybe sharper edges sometimes on the top, and then softer edges at the bottom where it just sort of bleeds into the sky. And then down at the bottom, they're often very flat. But, it's good to understand the formation of clouds, but and almost have tricks in your bag, but then to actually look at what's going on, because there's so many different kinds, and it's going to be different every day, and the light's going to be different every day. Colors are going to be different every day.
Because the light's changing so much and you're going to be spending a while, do you ever take a photograph on your phone of what it's like and then you can refer back to what it was like?
I do. And, I used to not do that at all. I remember first year in art school, I didn't know what I was doing. We would paint the model every morning from 10 to 2, and then we'd stay in the afternoons and work on whatever we wanted. So I was working on something from a photo, and Professor Klotz came over and he goes, "Oh," in German, "you're working from a photo." And the way he said it, I knew. And I was just shamed into working from a photo. And so, I mean, it was decades. I did not use a photo ever. And it's only lately that now I'll take a reference photo, and usually I don't use it. But it might be the next day I'll say, "Oh, on this one, what was the contrast between the house and the grass? I like that, but maybe I want to make that house a little bluer." Some little tweaks. So I do take reference photos now. Hardly ever use them. Sometimes I do, and I think it's just fine. I don't think painting from photos is going to get you where you want. So I really encourage people, paint from life as often as you can, if not exclusively. But I think every once in a while, looking back at the photo, thinking about, well, maybe I want to add a little tree there, whatever it is, that's fine.
Of course, and actually, taking a photograph is not like doing a sketch, because if you do a quick sketch to get a value, get the values, or to get some idea of how the composition is going to work out, then that's I think, a more active involvement. Whereas taking a photograph is a more passive involvement, and and as a result, you get more value out of the active involvement, in my opinion.
Okay, the darks in a photograph are always a bit monochromatic. They're just black, and the lights are very white. So you're not going to get the color from a photograph that you get from real life. Also, the angle of the lens of our eye is different than the angle of the lens of a camera. So if you're copying from a photograph, it's just going to look like a big blown up photograph when you're done. So I think that's why sketch from life, do your painting from life. If you need to refer to the photo later for whatever, you've already sat there or stood there and looked at what it is you're working on. You've internalized the colors and the warmth and the cools and the shadows. And when you look at the photo, you're actually seeing in your mind's eye the real thing. And then you can add the little bits of detail that you need.
Yeah, no, I have to say I agree. just for reference, it's definitely not something to be used as the main source of work from. Though I have to say, you're very fortunate living in California, where there's probably about 300 days of sunshine or clear uh, weather, whereas here it's about half that, I'd say.
That was a factor. Yeah, that was really a factor in Dresden. From October through March, it was pretty cold. And I remember a couple times going out with my friend. We went out in the sleet and the snow, and it's tough going out in that kind of weather. And I'm getting a bit too old for that. So, I've got my down coat and I've got all my heavy socks and everything. So going to the beach here in the winter, it's cold and windy, and I'll do that. But I don't go out in the sleet anymore. And yeah, it's another sunny day here. We could use some rain, but I'll take advantage of this. I can paint outside all year round.
Though we could send some of the rain here from Ireland over to you anytime you
I
want.
wish.
So actually, another painting, another landscape actually, which is Baylands, and it's the tree with the shadows in Baylands, and the shadow has been cast on a road or something beyond it.
I love that painting. So that one is sold. I don't have it here. But, with each painting, I smile because I remember that day. I remember being there. I remember the birds, or if it's an urbanscape, I remember the people that came by and talked to me. That's also one of the great things about plein air painting, is that you've experienced that day outside. These paintings, they're not static. They're a verb. They were made. They're an action more than anything else.
Just one other painting in the landscape, Californian landscape, and this is one which is Canada Road. Okay, and that's a picture
Yes.
of an S bend on the road.
Yes, and I don't have that one. Is also sold. I don't have that one, but I love that one. And I remember driving along that day looking for something to paint, and there it was. I just pulled over, and it seemed like a really peaceful spot. But about once every 5 minutes, these massive trucks would go by and jiggle everything. And I thought, I hope I am safe here on the side of the road. But I'm still here, all worked out. But yeah, I love those roads. And I love the fact that roads, when the sun is shining on them, are kind of purple, and then with the green, that's just one of my favorite color combinations is purple and green. But I like that painting. I'd like to go back there sometime.
Yeah, actually, it brings me to something else before we move on the paintings, which is sometimes when you make paintings, I don't sell very much. I've sold occasionally in the past, but mostly I just do it for my own pleasure. But on one or two occasions, very rare for me, I have to say, but I'm sure this is something that often happens, or possibly often happens to you, is you've made a painting and you like it, you don't want to sell it, and somebody wants to buy it, but you actually want it.
So many. You see all these? Now, not all of these are the ones that I keep forever, but quite a few of them. So any of the ones from Dresden, they're sentimental now. I was talking to my friend the other day, and I said, do you ever have paintings that you just can't sell? And he says, if I put it up on the wall, then I can't sell it. And I'm not sure that's true for me, but I have far too many that are just too dear to me, even if they're not that great. Now, I can show you this one. I just did it the other day. Was this from Friday? And this is East San Jose. And right now, the hills are very green. I'm not sure if you can see that.
Oh,
It's
I can
not
see it upon, yeah.
it's not an absolutely fantastic painting, but I remember being there on Friday, and it was just heaven, sitting there and looking at this little house, which looked like it was maybe turn of the century. And what you can't see is there's all different developments over here and over here, new homes. But just looking at that, I could see what California looked like in 1903, and it was quiet. There were birds and frogs, and I'm not sure that I can sell this painting just because I remember that day.
Yeah, and because you're painting a memory, basically.
That's it.
And you want to keep that memory, which is, makes sense, I guess.
Right, right.
So Waverly at Channing in Palo
Yes,
Alto.
right. Which we looked at briefly before. Right. I like this one. I feel as though I simplified the areas of the house. Just really thinking about what's light, what's in shadow. I really like this sort of phthalo green, the way the light would hit this the shade there, and so I even added a little phthalo green into the sky right down here to sort of produce some harmony.
Of course, and of course, you don't always have to paint exactly what's in there. It's not a photograph. You're actually painting whatever you want in there. I noticed, for example, in Forest Street, I think in Forest Street there was more greenery than actually you painted, because I saw something on Instagram
Right.
where you had taken a photograph when you were painting, I think, and there was a lot more greenery, but you isolated it into a different one, which makes a lot of sense. Really, it works really well, I have to say.
I remember on that one, I was thinking about the design of that ivy. How do I want the design of that ivy to be? Because that's a shape. And so I don't want to be a slave to what's in front of me. And I'm surprised how long it's taken me to get to that point where I feel comfortable moving things around. On this little guy here, I definitely moved these trees around. I even moved these hills. I moved the hills on this one. I do it all the time now. And I didn't before. I'm not sure why. Did I not know that you could, or was I just not comfortable enough? I just thought all I'm trying to do is represent that as well as I can onto my panel, and that was more than enough to do. So I move things around. I move mountains.
Yeah, well, very effectively, I might say as well. Just before we move off that painting, actually, the shadow cast by the ivy, is it ivy? I'm not sure what it is, the plant, but anyway, the leaves there, the shadows are lovely on the red brick.
I love that house. I think it's a little apartment house. I think a bunch of people live in it. But when I go by it, it just looks like some little elf fairy house that you'd find in Ireland or Europe somewhere. It's really lovely.
Yes, there is something about it that does attract you into it. Actually, just moving on to, I think this is called Vallejo, San Francisco. It's there's a little line out on the front of it.
I have him right here. I can peel him off the wall. Let's see. Here he is. I love this guy. Yeah, this was one of the ones where I thought, oh, I can't sell this. Yeah, I just love this street in San Francisco. A lot of times when I paint in San Francisco, my composition is determined by where can I get a parking spot. And this street, there's just plenty of parking. And right beyond this, around the corner, you look down into the bay and to the Palace of Fine Arts. But I really I paint a lot of these little lion statues. They're almost like little models. And it's like a portrait within the painting. And
It
yeah, I
is
love
a
that one.
focal point for it. But then your eye travels around that painting. And what I liked about it was you first of all look at the lion's face, and for me anyway, and then you travel around of the light coming through from the shadows of the trees on the stairs, and then on the ground, and then on the wall, and then finally you're moved inside to see what's inside the house as well. So it's a very nice painting.
Thank you. In some ways, it's almost a limited palette too. There really aren't that many colors going on here. And I think when something is small, that's also a good way to simplify, is to just limit, in a way that's limiting the shapes because it's the shapes of color too.
So another one here, which is Wool Street. Now, I really like this painting at Wool Street. It on I think it's Bernal Heights, San Francisco, and it's
Right,
a little
right.
greenhouse in the middle of a yellow and then a darker brown one.
I love that one. Yeah, it's over in the kitchen. I could have gotten that one, but yes, I really love that one too. I love, the slanted street there and just the way the light hits that greenhouse.
Yeah, the shadow, exactly. The fact that it's all in shadow except for a couple of little places where sunlight managed to actually catch the edge of the frontage on it. It works so well. And the car, actually, we'll talk about cars in a little bit later on, but I liked a little bit of a car there, which was quite nice.
I was just going to say, it's really important as a plein air painter to learn how to paint cars because they are everywhere. You want to paint a house, you need to know how to paint the car in front. I remember when I first started that sort of thing, sometimes the painting of the car would bring down the whole painting, and I would just trash the painting because the car looked awful. So, and I love painting cars, so that's good.
Yeah, and like I think you mentioned at one stage that you love to paint the chrome on the cars as well, depending on the car, of
Yes.
course.
Oh, all those blues and purples. Yes.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay. And so another painting here is the Western Motel, San Jose. Now, when I saw that painting, I thought, this looks like it's from the 80s or 90s or something. It seemed like from the past in some ways. I don't know what it was about it. Maybe it's the pink seats, or maybe it's the sign or something about it that sort of evoked a kind of a feeling of maybe 30 or 40 years ago.
I think even older. When I look at it, I see the 50s and the 60s of San Jose. So that was down in San Jose. I went through a phase where I just wanted to get all those old signs. I did as many as I could down there, but I liked that one the best. I actually drove into that motel, and then where the sign was, and then I thought, then I saw the pool, which was just fantastic. Yeah, I'm in another San Jose phase right now with those eastern green hills. But yeah, I liked the green cactus sign. It's just classic. And there's quite a few still down in San Jose.
Okay, that's great. So you've got rich pickings for future paintings.
I think anybody does, wherever you are. You just need to look around.
Yeah, that's exactly it. You have to look. Sometimes you can walk around and not see, but occasionally you when you want to actually do something, you have to look more clearly, and then you see a lot more than you realize was actually there.
That's right. I sometimes I'm very picky about, well, what am I going to paint today? And I end up driving around. And just like I was saying in Dresden, I'd be on my bike and I'd going by things. No, that's not it. That's not it. And then when 10 o'clock would hit, I would say, well, that's it. I'm stopping right here and I'm going to find a composition. And you always can. It doesn't matter. It's all practice.
And because you can move things around, you can say, I'm taking a piece of this and a piece of this, and I'm going to combine them together and use the light that's currently there and the shadows. And
That's right. But I couldn't do that back then. That was not part of what I knew how to do. It's like, this is it. This is it. This is what I'll try and paint.
just one other painting, side door. It's just the light catching underneath the window and a little bit of the step, and then I think it's a stainless steel handrail that's there. I wasn't sure if it was or not, but that's a simple painting, but it's very effective.
Yeah, that's one where I was really thinking about the different shapes. So because that's on the larger side, I started with a grisaille. So I did the sort of the black and white painting on the first day, and then a series of a couple of days after that, I added color. That is the little house that we rented here, and it was built in 1938. Very charming house. Good memories.
Yeah, and one thing that I like also about it, again, the traveling of your eye. When you look at that painting, you initially see just the light underneath the window, but then you see the steps, and then you're drawn inside into the bookcase that's inside. So that works really well, I have to say.
Thank you. I really tried to, put a little bit of the bookcase there, a little bit of the interior, but not too much.
Yeah, actually, that comes back to the idea of simplifying stuff in paintings as well. It's deciding what to include and not to include is a crucial decision, I guess, really. You know, your eye really doesn't look at a lot of detail. You're aware of things in your peripheral vision, but mostly you only see sharply a small amount of, I'd say, what's in front of you. So you don't have to have everything in fine detail, I don't think, only part of it possibly.
Right. And I find that the biggest challenge in my paintings right now is to leave out the details. I'm still working on that. I feel like I'm an old dog learning new tricks, and I'll get there, but it's taking me a while because, I came to art school or the beginning of my art career, just painting every detail I could, and working not only from life but also from photos. And so I've really had to evolve and push myself in this other direction.
Well, that's natural if you think about it. You want to be able to draw everything completely right. And then
Right.
it's only when you feel that you can, then you feel you have permission not to draw the items. You could draw them if you want to, but you don't want to. You just want to draw enough to suggest what you need.
Yes, I think that looseness, though, just goes against my nature. I find it very difficult to be sloppy, and I'm trying more and more, which is why these little paintings help. Because, as I said, they don't make brushes small enough to get into the detail in those little paintings, so I'm forced to be a little sloppy.
Also, I guess in terms of loose paintings versus like very finely detailed paintings, it's probably easier to do looser paintings if it was a much larger painting because you're using your arm as opposed to using your wrist. Whereas if you're using a small painting, but you're still managing to get loose paintings. But it's a different sort of, I guess, a different motion if you've got a much bigger painting and you're painting loosely. Maybe you're not even holding the paint brush very finely towards the tip. You're holding it further back, and then that's actually making it much looser as well.
Yes, although I can get into lots of detail in a big painting too. So yeah, it's something that I battle on every painting.
Regarding the detail and lack of detail, both of them are quite effective. And it was a comment I made to you, I think, in email, which was I felt that a lot of your work in Dresden was illustrate. It was like an illustrator. You had a lot of fine detail that was in there. And that's what an illustrator tends to do, I guess. And your paintings now tend to be more looser, much looser, but very effective, much more effective. I think your style has evolved tremendously over the number of years that you've been painting. I much prefer the work that you're doing now. Having said that, I do like the illustrations. In fact, maybe we could just talk about one or two of the paintings from Germany. One of the ones that comes to mind is Moritzburger Strasse.
Yes, I love this painting. I really love it. This one I did over a series of a couple of days. Even though it's on the small side, I just it needed more and more, so I kept going back there, rode up on my bike. What a lovely spot this was, and I remember these days were very hot. So it was really nice to be standing in this entranceway here. It was nice and cool. And then back there, little kids were playing, and I really liked this little red thing. I thought that added to the painting. And again, you can see, oh gosh, there's my Payne's gray, and there's the Payne's gray, perhaps with a little bit of phthalo green, but it definitely has a different palette than what I would have used today.
I immediately thought of lots of times when I was in Berlin where I was staying in an apartment block and out in the back there was a big courtyard, and you have those particular doors that they just have in Germany. They don't have them here in Ireland. I don't think they guess they have them in California
Oh,
either. Those big doors that
no.
open wide, and little cobblestones. The cobblestones are,
Yes.
they're lovely to paint, I'm sure.
I miss all of that for sure. Yes, beautiful architecture there. I just love those thick doors, and they build everything to last for 500 years, and it does.
Emanuel Kirkstrasse. The blueness of the color, of course, or Payne's grey, I guess, really you were using, which you said you were using there. The shadow is great of the roof being cast onto the side of the building, and then the church in the distance. It reminded me a lot of Berlin, anyway, I have to say.
I love that one. It's our courtyard. That was our courtyard. And I remember seeing the sun there and just thinking, oh my gosh, I need to paint that. And it was one of the rare days that I was there without, at the time, our little baby. And so I just grabbed my paint and I centered in around that shadow area, because I knew even in 10, 15 minutes that shadow was going to be moving. And then I worked on it again over successive days, at the same time of day, of course, to just sort of solidify that shadow and the colors.
I love these interior paintings. If we could just discuss a couple of them. The green light Okay, and it's got just the light, a little bit of reflected light on the green wall and an open door, and then the light coming in on the red carpet. So well observed.
Thank you. So that's, that's the other side of that side door. That's looking at it from the inside. It was really a charming house, and I loved how they painted the walls that sort of greenish color when the sun hit it. It was just great. I like interiors. I think that they're easier to do than a plein air. There's the light is still going to change a lot, but all the structures are going to stay put. There just seems like less variation. So it's kind of like a still life in a way.
The hallway where you have that lovely light reflection on the floorboards that brings your eye right up through the hallway and into the room behind.
Again, that was that little rental house, and I just loved the floorboards and the way the light would shine. It was almost fluid, the way the light would shine on that wood. Old floorboards, old wood is nice.
That also is an evidence in the living room painting, which had the bookcase in further back, but your eyes brought in the light. Basically, the light reflection from the floorboards brings you through the whole house.
I love books, and I think that when you paint a subject matter that you love, maybe you spend more time on it. Maybe you just think more about it, but you do a better job when you're painting a subject matter that really draws you, that you really love. And I've done many of books because I just love bookshelves and books and reading. It's fantastic.
Those books look really like inviting.
They are.
Just the last painting, if we could talk about, was, and you showed it earlier on as well, which was the painting of John.
Right. So this one, right?
Yeah.
Right. So, I painted him a lot. He's a great model. And, I don't need to paint a chin with that beard. So that's great. I also really love the way light hits his head. That's also wonderful. So yeah, he probably sat for us for 3 sessions. Usually it's 4 hours a session. So the first day would have been a grisaille, just the black and white. And then I had 2 more days to build up the color. And I think you can see that there's a little bit of a translucency with these colors here, and that's because of the grisaille. That's because of the layering of the paint, as opposed to something like this, where you just don't see that same sort of glow, because the paint here, you've got oil mixed in with the paint, and then another layer of oil mixed in with the paint. So the light goes through, comes back through both of those layers, and we see the light coming through. It just glows more.
Of course, it makes it luminous. That's what I felt from the painting.
That's right. And again, your eye is mixing those colors, and they're not being physically mixed here. So it's multiple colors being mixed in our eyes.
Yeah. Okay, Maura. So look, that's super. That's given me a huge insight to the massive amount of work that you've done and the development over a number of years. And it's been really interesting to look at. Just one question before we finish up, and that is, what are you working on now at the moment?
Right now, I'm in this plein air phase. I don't, my phases last weeks to months, and then I'll go into something else. As you said in the beginning of the interview, I really enjoy portraits, still lifes, landscapes, urbanscapes. So I like it all. And right now, I'm just going out every day. I'm just really enjoying being outside, listening to the birds, and trying to find a subject matter that will challenge me to simplify, trying to do the things that are really hard for me. So things that have a lot of, maybe, in San Francisco, something with a lot of buildings. I find that very challenging to simplify that. Out in the landscape, maybe a lot of trees, to simplify that. So I'm in a plein air phase right now, but as soon as things start opening up and we get models again, I know I'm going to go back to integrating a model into my week, and I'll just see where it takes me.
It's been really interesting to talk to you, Maura, and thanks very much.
Thank you so much, Frank. It's been my pleasure.
Made us find each other out there. Made us realize we're more than just stardust. Ignore this fact if you must, to do what your dreams are telling you to do. And I'll be out there looking for someone like you.